Hello, it's Romanosky from Calgary, Canada, and this video is a documentation of a Series 2 Land Rover that my associates and I restored from 2019 to 2022. So the video goes through a brief history of the Series 2 Rover. It goes through some of the decisions and the rationale we made for certain upgrades that we did in the interest of parts supply and drivability. And it gives you an idea of, well, how many parts there are in a Land Rover when they're all spread out all over the ground, and what it takes to do a concours nut and bolt professional restoration on one of these very significant and iconic vehicles. So the video starts out with a brief history of the Series 2, how it differs from the nearly identical looking Series 2A, and then it goes through this restoration part by part, describing, the coatings and what was NOS, what was a new reproduction, what was from a later series vehicle. And then at the end of the video, we have about 150 photographs, which shows you the documentation of it step by step. So please enjoy. Thank you very much. And please like and subscribe.
The Series 2 would have come out in 1958. Midway through 1961, they changed it to a 2A from a Series 2. It's visually almost identical. The differences lie in the engine, basically. The Series 2 debuted with a 2.25 liter petrol engine that was quite a bit larger and more powerful than the Series 1s, which used a 1600 and a 2 liter F-head engine from the Rover cars. This new engine, coming out in 1958, was 2.25 liter. It had around 80 horsepower, and the earlier engines had around 50. These were about 80 horsepower and about 120 pound-feet of torque. So considerably more powerful than the Series 1s. They rationalized the production of their petrol and diesel engines in 1961. The Series 2 started out with a 2.25 liter petrol, which was new, but they continued with the 2 liter diesel, which was an older engine. For 61, they wanted to rationalize the diesel and the petrol, so they redesigned the 2.25 liter petrol in 1961 to achieve some parts commonality with the diesel. They're both sharing the same block and crank. That means that the Series 2 petrol engine is a little bit of an orphan, because all of the worldwide parts and repair specialists that have been set up to look after Land Rovers really only cater to the later 2.25 liter petrol, which was in production from 61 all the way up into the mid 80s. Okay, so the earlier one, nobody rebuilds, nobody will take it as a core, and nobody really makes the spare parts for those original 2.25 liter engines. So just about anybody who restores a Series 2 Land Rover with its original 2.25 liter petrol will put in a later engine just for the ease of servicing and parts availability. And that's what we've done here. This engine dates to about 1970. It also happens to have a higher compression head, 8-to-1 versus 7-to-1. It has some other modifications as well. That is a Weber carburetor, and the original Series 2 and 2A Rovers would have been positive earth, which will just kind of confuse most people. And so this one has a wiring harness from the mid 60s, and it's a negative earth wiring harness, which I think makes life a little bit easier for servicing the car. So visually, this looks like it came off the assembly line in 1961 as a Series 2, but it does have some subtle mechanical improvements. It looks identical. Even the engine looks identical, or almost identical, but it's got a upgrade to a later Series 2A negative earth wiring harness. and it's got a later higher compression head and engine from dating to about 1970, okay? So the collectors mostly value the look of the earlier Rovers, specifically the headlights in the grille panel, the single side lights as opposed to the dual side lights, the banjo type steering wheel. It was replaced by a plastic wheel in, I think, 1965, and the individual wiper motors. So we wanted to keep this vehicle looking like a 1961 and keeping all of those visual items, but we wanted to upgrade the mechanicals a little bit, just so it's easier to service, better parts availability, a little bit smoother running. So we've got in the engine compartment, we do have the original radiator, the original air cleaner assembly. We've got the Kodiak heater, and I think it's a Mark III Kodiak heater. We've got a new Weber carburetor that we thought was a sensible upgrade. I think we bought about 4 coils for this car, and none of them worked. And finally we found one that actually worked. It's the wrong color, it should be black, but we have a new Bosch coil. We've got, and that is the reservoir for both the brake and the clutch fluid. Okay. We have the capstan winch, which has all of the linkage. I don't know if you can see all that in there. All the linkage present and is operational, which is quite a feat actually to get that all to work properly. And we've got, this is a 88-inch utility, they call it. The reason it's called a utility, or the way you can tell it's a utility, is it has this knife-edged bonnet and not the curved deluxe bonnet. We have the canvas top, which they call a tilt in the UK, and this is the full canvas tilt from Exmoor in the UK. Exmoor also gave us these side pockets for the doors and the deluxe upholstery. Deluxe mean they actually have ribs in them, as opposed to just smooth vinyl. Okay, so that's what we've done. We've also added seat belts. In this case, they're shoulder belts and kind of a aircraft style closure. They used to use belts like this in some of the sports cars, so I thought that was kind of interesting. So we've got subtle modifications to the original design, mostly mechanical, but a few sensible things such as the seat belts and some optional accessories like the front capstan winch and rear seats. Okay, let's see the rear seats back here. All right, I can talk about our objectives with this Rover and some of the philosophy behind it and some of the reasons, the reasoning behind some of the decisions that we made. Okay, so going back to the beginning here, I had a friend who collected Land Rovers and collected Land Rover parts, and he probably had about 10 of them. And some of them were disassembled, some of them were whole. The disassembled ones, he had all the parts organized on racks and so forth. And his aim was always to restore one, but just kind of never got around to it. And I think he enjoyed collecting the parts more than working on the trucks. So So I had restored a few Rovers in the past, and anyway, he was a very knowledgeable guy. His dad actually had a Land Rover repair facility in the 50s. So he grew up with Land Rovers. And in the 80s and 90s, he would have received all the Rovers North flyers and so forth. And this was in an era when Rovers North had all the NOS parts, all the new old stock parts for Land Rover. And every month they'd get a new catalog in those days. Now it's kind of like a fancy brochure, but in those days it was a catalog, and they'd have specials from Rovers North. And every month he'd buy, you know, a box of stuff from Rovers North, and he collected all these NOS parts. And I can show you, I'll put up some photographs of those parts. And, you know, I'd kind of keep asking him about it. Well, what are you going to do with those Rovers? And, you know, when are you going to restore one? And what are you going to do with those parts? And he just kind of never got around to it. And finally I said, well, listen, why don't I do it then? Why don't I buy a couple of these Rovers, and I'll buy all your spare parts for you. All right, so we made a deal, and I think I bought two. Well, I bought three of his altogether. Two were whole, or mostly whole, and then one was kind of disassembled, and I bought all these extra parts. And I had a couple of Rovers on my own, so I wound up with about 5 of them. And then I decided I was going to make 2 of them out of the 5, and that one of them was going to be a driver and one of them was going to be a Concours rebuild. And so what I did is I kind of took all of the parts for the 5 vehicles, separated the ones I wanted for the driver, which was a blue one that I sold on Bring a Trailer in well, I guess I sold it earlier in 2022, I suppose. And then there was this one, and I kept all the NOS parts for this. And if I had, you know, 3 seat boxes, I kept the best seat box for this one, and the second best one went on the other truck. So I accumulated all the NOS parts, and then from 5 Rovers, I then selected all the best parts for this one. And then I bought a whole bunch of NOS parts too. So then the objective for this was to build up a 60s Rover. I didn't want it to be like a museum piece. I wanted to be able to use it. I wanted all the parts to be, you know, genuine Land Rover parts, not as much as possible reproduction parts. And I wanted the DNA of all the pieces as much as possible to be in the 1960s. Okay, so I didn't want to just go through a new Land Rover catalog and buy and build the whole thing with reproduction new manufacturer parts. I wanted to try to keep everything from the 1960s with as much NOS as possible, and if they weren't NOS, at least correct. Okay, so as much as possible, I think that's what we did. And so I took these 5 Rovers apart, and then I selected all, you know, the best pieces for this one, and then I went through the process of getting them all sandblasted, bead blasted, acid dipped, painted, galvanized, electroplated, you know, whatever those parts, whatever I wanted to do to those parts. I wanted to galvanize just about all the steel bits that could be galvanized. So this vehicle has a galvanized bulkhead and a galvanized frame. They were not galvanized from the factory; they were just painted. But it's you know, a much more durable process. And any bit of steel that I found like that support for the bulkhead was galvanized. The parts that had linkages on them or springs on them, you know, something like that, those were electroplated. The bonnet prop rod here is electroplated. The framework for the bonnet, that's galvanized. So if looking throughout this build, I tried to coat every piece, zinc coat it, either electroplate zinc or galvanize or CAD plate it, wherever possible, just for the maximum durability. And so there's a mix of different coatings. But anyway, I took all the parts off. I figured out what could be galvanized and what couldn't, what was going to be electroplated, what was going to be zinc plated. And then I got all those parts treated, coated, and ready, and wound up with just basically a big pile of parts. So just to go through it here, some parts we didn't really have any choice. We had to get new manufacture. Like for instance, the outer fender, this is a new manufacture piece out of aluminum. We couldn't find any used ones that would work, and there were no NOS ones. These inner fenders, so this panel and this whole assembly, those were all NOS, bought it at great cost from Rovers North. And these pieces really get beat up. So I was really happy to find those, even though they're expensive. This grill panel here is an NOS part as well. And they, I mean, the radiator assembly is really heavy, and the moisture collects at the bottom. So these ones all rust fairly badly at the bottom. So this was, so it's hard to find a good one. And the part was NOS, and then I galvanized it for good measure. So it won't rust again. The capstan winch, was, the winches are relatively easy to find, but the linkages aren't. And so we spent a lot of time, getting parts machined and getting that capstan to work. That probably took a couple of weeks for us to do that. Huh?
And thank goodness for machinists that understand small one-piece jobs here and there.
Yeah.
We had a machinist that just understood what we needed and built it to perfection. It absolutely operates like it should.
Yeah, that was tough because the linkage. I mean, nobody uses capstan winches anymore. They're all ripped off and replaced by electric winches. And when they rip off the capstan winch, nobody keeps any of the linkage pieces. So it's actually really hard to get one back to work. Okay, and the bonnet. This is the knife edge bonnet. It differs in that there's a deluxe bonnet which has a curved front profile. Okay, this one comes with the utility. You can see this. It's an aluminum bonnet with a steel support, and that support would have been normally painted black from the factory. But if there was a part that was steel that could be galvanized, we made the decision to galvanize it just for longevity. There's another video that I did on Land Rover galvanizing if you want to deep dive into that. And we could have painted it black, but the galvanizing just looked so pretty that we just left it galvanized. There's some things that you can't galvanize. Well, if you put aluminum in there, you won't get it back because it heats it up to like 700 degrees Fahrenheit. It's also quite goopy. And if you have springs or hinges or other mechanisms, you can't really galvanize it because the hot zinc will just clog everything up. So there's parts that are silver that look galvanized, or at least the same color, but they're actually electroplated. So that's electroplated with silver CAD. This is electroplated, the bonnet support, but this is galvanized. Okay. So we have the new old stock buffer, as they call it, with the bronze split rivet. The grill has been re-galvanized. We have NOS headlights, NOS grill panel. We have an NOS No, that's wrong. It's not an NOS bumper, but it's a re-galvanized bumper. The frame would never have been galvanized new. They would have been painted black, but this one is galvanized and left. The bulkhead in this is actually galvanized, but painted, okay? The factory, they would have galvanized the cappings on the rear bodywork and the doors, and they would have galvanized the windscreen frame. So those were re-galvanized. Looking in the engine bay, we have a rebuilt generator. We've got a new manufacturer water pump, NOS thermostat. We've got the original fan support, the shroud, and those actually go missing. They're hard to find. We have a new manufacturer Weber carburetor that we put in just in the interest of drivability. We have an NOS heat shield, and again, those go missing a lot and they're hard to find, even with the correct brackets. We have new manufacturer clutch and brake master cylinders, a new manufacturer reservoir for the fluid for both brake and clutch fluid. The coil, we bought about 4 coils for this car and none of them worked, and we finally found the right combination that works. It just happens to be blue. It should be black, but we've replaced it 4 times and we're not replacing it again. We have an NOS. No, we have a new manufacturer voltage regulator and fuse box. That is a Kodiak heater, and I believe it is a Mark III heater. And the fresh air supply is in the wheel arch. We have the original oil bath filter, and as I said earlier, this is running a 8-to-1 compression head, and the engine serial number dates it to about 1970. We rebuilt the steering box. All of the ball joints are new. You can see that, you know, the support for the engine, all those steel parts have been galvanized. The bulkhead support is galvanized, and what else is galvanized? Let's have a look. For the axles, we had all new old stock parts. We have new old stock swivel balls and the new old stock bearings throughout. The front springs are original, sandblasted and repainted. You can see that the spring support has been galvanized, and here is a detail of all of the bump stops were new old stock. And here you can see the linkage for the capstan, which is really quite intricate. It's got its own drive shaft, which sits in a bronze bearing, and then there's a collar which gets mated to the front of the crank, and a lever which does that. Bottom of the capstan, which is filled with oil. All the brake hoses are new. Splash guards in the wheel arches are galvanized. Okay. The lights in this car were all new old stock and came in Land Rover boxes. Okay, walking around the vehicle, the windscreen, that was sandblasted and then re-galvanized. The wiper arms are new manufacture. The hinges for the hood were re-galvanized. the hinges for the doors, those that have been painted new, and we decided to galvanize them. There's often they start to rust, so that's why we did that. The support for the door, again, that was regalvanized. All four wheels are new old stock wheels, and they have new Michelin, they're bias ply tires, right? Seven and a half by 16 bias ply tires. And I got those from Rovers North. We have 3 of these side steps, and they were, that was a bit dirty. They were NOS. The seat box had, are they radios? All 4 wheels are NOS, and they have new Michelin 7.5 times 16 Latitude Cross tires. And I believe these are a commercial tire. They're certainly a lot heavier duty than the normal Michelin Latitude. And I got those from Rovers North. Okay, so the doors and the door tops are original 1960s pieces. One of the doors, I think the driver's door, was reskinned at great expense, actually. I should have probably bought new doors. I think one door cost me $1,500, and one door top was substantially rebuilt, and that was another $1,500. So the money we spent on doors, like restoring and refinishing the doors, was a lot of money on this car. But when you buy the reproduction door tops, they don't look quite the same, don't have the original hardware, etc. Okay, all of the weather stripping and the channels for the doors, that's all new old stock. The handle assembly, so that's too intricate to hot dip galvanize, and so that was electroplated, CAD electroplated. We've got all the canvas comes from Exmoor trim in the UK, as do the front seats, which are the deluxe variety. And Exmoor would be familiar to anybody restoring Rovers. Okay, so all these pieces in the cabin, again, if it could be galvanized, we galvanized it, so we can see the support from the steering column is galvanized. The back of the wheel, normally that's painted black, that's alloy, and so I just polished that up just because I thought it was pretty. And the individual wiper motors, those have all been taken apart and cleaned up, and they work. They would have been painted, I think, silver, and well, it depends on the year, I think. Some were silver, some were black, I believe. Anyway, we left this the natural alloy, okay? We've got the vent screens, which were new old stock. And in the cabin, we can see that it's got the quadrant control for the throttle and the earlier type of dash. We've got the VIN plate for the car, and we're using, you can see that's the starter button, and that's characteristics of the early Rovers. The choke is there, and ignition's in the center. We have the Smith's safety gauge, oil pressure and water temperature, and we found this matching clock, electric clock. We added, this wouldn't have had signal lights from new, so we added the signal light switch, horn is underneath it, and then we've got the hazard switch there. The deluxe seats from Exmoor have the fluting in them and the profile instead of just the plain seats. And we've got rear seats, bench seats in the back, along with this seatbelt bar holding some, three-point aircraft style seatbelts. We added an interior light that we wired up, and then new floor mats from Rovers North, and these side steps, which are on either side and in the rear, are NOS. We had the bracket kit for the shovel, which was also NOS. We regalvanized the rear grab handles, as we did the rear toe plate and hook. The rear lights were new in Land Rover boxes, the tail lights and the side lights. The reverse lamp was new manufacture, and the license plate lamp was new manufacture, and the reverse lamp and the side reflectors were also new manufacture. The fuel cap surround is galvanized. The latch was a new old stock piece. This side step was again new old stock, and we bought a new manufacturer stainless fuel tank from Pangolin 4x4, which is a Land Rover supplier in Oregon. We can see the new brake lines, all the assemblies, U-joints, transmission, or linkages for the handbrake, etc., are all taken apart, cleaned up, and fully rebuilt. And we've got NOS shocks, NOS check straps, NOS axle bump stops, NOS transmission mounts. Rovers North supplied us with the boots for the U-joints, and we can see all the correct routing for the brake hoses and so forth. Originally, the bottom of the Rovers would have been just bare aluminum, but there's lots of space under there to collect dirt and so on. So we painted the alloy underneath and in the wheel arches on this car. So we coated a lot more items than would have been for the factory, just in the interest of keeping it clean. We have an NOS exhaust, and we have an NOS exhaust hangers. I'll show you that. Mud flaps were new manufacture, but the three-piece exhaust system and all of the hangers was new old stock. The wiring harness was from Auto Sparks in the UK, and it is the correct cloth harness, and all of these clips were recoded in CAD, and they're all in the correct places. The battery cables are NOS. The battery bracket is NOS. The Kodiak heater, it's a Mark III heater, that was taken apart and restored. The distributor is an NOS piece. Sorry, it's not. It's a new manufacturer piece from Rovers North. The radiator is original, that has been restored. The exhaust manifold is a new old stock piece. Intake manifold was cleaned up. The carburetor is new manufacture. You can see that piece, the support for the reservoir for the brake and fluid, that was galvanized. The The steering box was taken apart and rebuilt and polished up. The reservoir is a new manufacture item. The brake and clutch master cylinders are correct, new manufacture. The coil is should be black, but we bought about 4 coils for this car before we found one that worked. So we're leaving the blue one in here because it works. The voltage regulator and the fuse box are new manufacture. We can see the cross shaft there in the background for the hand throttle, or for the throttle and the hand throttle. That was cadmium plated. All the linkage pieces were black zinc coated. I wanted them black, but I wanted them to be black zinc. And all of the hardware here that you see is the correct Whitworth hardware. Generator was rebuilt locally. The water pump was new. Thermostat was a new old stock piece. The fuel filter is a new piece. So they wouldn't have come like that. We just added it for some extra protection. We kept most of the original Jubilee hose clamps, which are actually really tough to find. Not exclusively, because we couldn't find enough of them, but most of them are the original hose clamps. We have the NOS decals for the valve cover that I found in the stash. The cover for the valve cover was a new manufacture. What else can I tell you about this? We can see the new NOS exhaust. The heat shield was new old stock. The ball joints were a collection of new old stock and new manufacture. I think I had half of them were new old stock. The shroud for the radiator was a new old stock item. The labels, or the plates, negative earth plate, that was another new old stock item, as was this one. The fitting for the pin for the hood, and that was that's CAD electroplated.